Hello everyone, and welcome to our APUSH YouTube review. This is a review on Art and Literature Part 1. We're going to be looking at early colonial up to the American Revolution and afterwards. It should go fairly quickly. I'm only going to focus on talking about the actual examples. You'll notice there will be key concepts in this PowerPoint. I'm not going to reference them a lot. They're there, you can read them and see them for yourself. And again, there is no video log for this, so you're not required to turn in anything for a grade. This is just for you to take some notes on art and literature in America. So we'll start, again, early colonial period. So we have to start with the Puritans, as always. We see here the model of Christian charity, which we've talked about quite a few times now. Exactly. 1630 is when the Puritans came over. This is Jonathan Winthrop. He's the author of the model of Christian charity. Of course, the famous quote there is "City upon a hill." Our first famous sermon in America, although we're pretty sure Jonathan perhaps never actually gave the sermon out loud. There isn't any written diary or any dialogue that ever says he did, but it's still a very important document for us. Bay Psalms, all right, this is a song book that they sang in their churches. This is the first published work in all of America, the Bay Psalms. Remember, the Puritans, very much lovers of education. Yes, of course. Yes, we know religion too. But education was very, very central to who they were. They built a lot of schools as they also built their churches. Harvard is the first university in America. Many pamphlets, sermons, poetry written by the Puritans throughout the 16 and early 1700s. And again, this early literature in America, very religious in nature, of course, and very, very important to their way of life. As we move into the 1700s, we get a Great Awakening, very much influenced by the Enlightenment of Europe, also religious in nature. But again, I'm looking here at the literature of the day. Again, very religious, sinners in the hands of an angry God, right? That's Jonathan Edwards. Why is it they're all named John? I don't know. But again, a very important sermon that becomes a written piece of literature in America. But by the end of the Great Awakening, getting closer to the mid-1700s, we are going to see other forms of literature emerge. We have this transatlantic print culture that is coming to America. A lot of books are written in Europe and are coming to America. And some Americans, like Benjamin Franklin, are also writers. He's going to take an almanac, a type of book that's used for farmers that tell you, when to plant, when to harvest, rainy seasons for that sort of thing, the various cycles of the moon. But he's going to add a character here to it, Poor Richard, right? And Poor Richard's almanac becomes very famous. It makes Franklin a lot of money, and a print revolution begins in America and a print culture. Also, newspapers become very, very important at this time period. Americans want to read about events not only happening in Europe, but newspapers become local. What is happening in my own town? What is happening in the region in which I live, the colony in which I live? What's happening overall in other colonies? Newspapers become very vital to the growth of America and help to create an American identity as they start looking at interests in their newspapers that really only affect them. Let's look at some of the art of the time period. There are no schools of art in America. Surprise, surprise, surprise. During this early colonial period, you'd have to go to Europe in order to be an artist. But one of the first famous artists in American history is John Singleton Copley. Very famous for portrait paintings. This is Paul Revere, one of the Sons of Liberty. He also painted other clip art you've seen in class throughout the course of the year. Samuel Adams, Mercy Otis Warren, John Adams. Interestingly, Copley, when the American Revolution begins, turns out he's a loyalist. Remember, a loyalist is an American who's loyal to England. And he winds up leaving the colonies and lives out the rest of his life in England. His very famous student is Benjamin West. Now, his style of painting is a little different. He likes to capture scenes of history. He feels that as an artist, he can give us some sort of historical moment in time. This particular painting, one of his famous ones, the death of General Wolfe during the French-Indian War, the Battle of Quebec, where General Wolfe, a British general, dies here and leading his troops to victory. West is a famous student again of Copley, and much like his teacher, West also is a loyalist and will go back to England during the American Revolution as well. Charles Willson Peale and Gilbert Stuart are both patriots, and a patriot is an American loyal to the American cause, right? Peale and Stuart, very famous for painting George Washington's. Peale painted, here's a young Washington as a colonel in the Virginia militia. He also painted Washington as a general in the Continental Army during the American Revolution. Peale also, by the way, he had a commission in the Army. He serves as an officer and will see combat. This is one of Gilbert Stuart's most famous paintings. It's called The Unfinished Washington because, he didn't finish it. You probably see this face quite often as well. This particular cutie pie right here who never smiles because he's got really bad teeth, if any at all. This is the template for the American dollar bill. So the Unfinished Washington is the one that they use in order to create the dollar bill George Washington. All right, again, the American Revolution, during this time period, literature and writing turns very political, mostly pamphlets again. The most famous is Common Sense by Thomas Paine, published in 1776, January. This is before the Declaration of Independence was written. Later in June of 1776, they began to sign it in July. But again, just showing that many of our documents at this time period are going to be more political in nature, very less religious in that sense. Going back to art, John Trumbull, another famous patriot painter, wants to paint scenes specific to the American Revolution and American history. You see here the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Again, this is his artistic rendering of this. He will show it to a very old John Adams, who will call this all lies, because for John Adams, he wants everything to be as accurate as 100% as possible. But again, an artist can't do that. But again, most of these Trumbulls, by the way, if you've ever been to Washington, D.C. and to the Capitol building, you'll notice there's these giant paintings of the wall under the rotunda. Some of these paintings are there. Here is the victory at Saratoga. Remember, Saratoga is the turning point battle of the war, because when America wins this, it's a massive battle, and they beat the British Army at Saratoga, upstate New York. The French wind up entering the war. This, by the way, is not George Washington. I know it's hard to see. It's a tiny little clip art. This is Horatio Gates. Gates is a general who doesn't like Washington and eventually will try to overthrow him as general, and then later on try to lead a conspiracy against the government. The Newburgh Conspiracy, we talked about that once in class. This is where men like Gates and some members of Congress are thinking it might be better to create maybe a dictatorship instead. And Washington finds out about it because of his network of spies, and he winds up exposing them in Newburgh, New York. Here is the Battle of Yorktown, or the victory at Yorktown. That's Washington in the background. Yorktown is the last official battle of the war. Why is Washington in the background? Well, General Cornwallis, the general for the British, refused to come out and surrender to Washington. He sent out a lieutenant. That embarrasses Washington, so he sends out one of his lesser officers. If you remember, this is the French army forming a wall. Here's the American army. This is creating a gauntlet where the British Army will march through here, and let's say over here is the port where there are ships. There's an American band right about here, and the American band is playing the song over and over again called "And the World Turned Upside Down." Here is Washington surrendering his sword. Again, go back to the Newburgh conspiracy. Washington understood history. He loved Roman history especially, and he was very particular to the story of Cincinnatus, a famous Roman who was elected dictator for a year to beat an enemy. He does. Then they try to elect him dictator for life, and Cincinnatus says Rome needs no king, and he refuses to do it. Washington wants to set the same principle. He turns over his sword. One of the greatest lessons that Washington gives America is when to give power back. He did it as a general. He will do it again as a president. 2 terms, and he gives power back. He does not seek a 3rd or a 4th term. Very strong lesson from Washington, and you can see it here played out in art. We'll end it here with the American Revolution. We know they create a government with the Articles of Confederation that is a weak government, and now they're going to have to write a constitution eventually. I'm not going to go into all the details about that. We're doing that in class instead. However, people began to debate the purpose of said constitution. Enter a document called the Federalist Papers, written by 3 of our founding fathers. Only 2 of them, Hamilton and Madison, are mentioned here in the concepts because our 3rd founding father, our forgotten founding father, never gets any love. Just so sad. John Jay. Think about it. John Jay he was a signer of the peace treaty that ended the war with Britain, along with Benjamin Franklin and John Adams. He has a treaty named after him, Jay's Treaty. Well, not a very good treaty, as we've talked about in class either, but he has a treaty named after him. He's the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's one of the writers of the Federalist Papers. Of course, he did get sick and perhaps didn't write too many of them. And again, one of the things about the Federalist Papers is none of these men put their names to it, so we're not 100% sure who wrote what. But in any case, the Federalist Papers, they're 85 essays that are collected to try to explain why we need a constitution. They're published in New York newspapers because the state of New York wasn't sure if they wanted to ratify the Constitution or not. 2 of the Federalist Papers that we talk about in class, Federalist number 10. That one explains the dangers of a faction. Remember, in that paper, it says you cannot destroy liberty, nor can you give everybody the same thought in order to get rid of a faction. So you have to allow a faction to exist. You can only control the effects or the outcome of a faction. In Federalist number 51, why do we need a government? Because men are not angels. We need a government that can not only control the people, but can also control itself. So again, much of our writing here of the Revolutionary period, political. The next YouTube video we'll show how our literature will eventually start to change after the War of 1812. Until then, have a good evening. Bye-bye now.